Well, I think we can actually begin with our webinar for today while other people are joining us. Hello, dobar dan, dobar den, mirdita, and welcome to Catalyst webinar on nonprofit tech needs for organizations that are registered in the Western Balkans. And I just realized how it feels to be a Eurovision host with these greetings in various languages. My name is Miloš Jankovic, and I'm actually communications manager here at Catalyst Balkans. And we have a very important and new research to share with you guys today. I hope that this will be valuable, especially for those of you who are coming here from the donors community, as well as for the nonprofits, so that we can find a way to push digital transformation of our sector a bit better, and to try to achieve a greater impact through technology in our societies. Before we start with the program, I would just kindly ask you a couple of things, and just to go through a code of conduct for our webinars. So please mute your microphones and turn off your cameras so that you can actually hear the speaker all the time. And also, we encourage you to participate in discussions and ask questions in the chat box. So I will read all of your questions, all of your messages in our chat box, and after Nathan finishes with his presentation, we will go through all of those questions. And just please, if you have anything to ask, write it in the chat box. Of course, as usual, and I believe that in the past 6 months you all realized that some of you might have some internet connection problems. So if you lose your connection, feel free just to come back using the same link that my colleague Daniela sent you an hour ago. And of course, after the webinar, well, actually tomorrow morning, you will receive the link with the video. You will receive this presentation and infographic on nonprofit tech needs in the Western Balkans. And of course, you will be able to ask any further questions if you have for us. We probably know each other already, but I know that there are some new organizations that we didn't have opportunity to interact with so far, and I will just briefly introduce you to Catalyst Balkans and our mission. We're all about data and tech for social good, and we're actually developing philanthropy and transforming Western Balkans philanthropy ecosystem through research, tools, and skills development for both fundraisers and donors. We strongly believe that the real change is the one that comes from within, and that's why we believe that mobilization of local resources and philanthropy are actually key for advancement of our societies. And our work is basically divided into 3 different pillars. We do research and advocacy on who is giving to whom, how much, why, where, and when all donations happen in the Western Balkans. We also develop and provide support for use of various digital tools for nonprofits and donors. And finally, we are helping, again, both nonprofits, fundraisers, and donors to develop their skills for online fundraising, for community building, and various other areas that are relevant to philanthropy and fundraising. And of course, technology. For the past, I know, probably 2 years, Nathan will correct me, we've been talking about doing a research throughout the whole region on how nonprofits are using technology today. We all know that the whole world has shifted, that digital transformation goes through all of our society, but unfortunately, to be honest, our sector, nonprofit sector, is a little bit behind the curve, and we wanted to see what tools the nonprofits use and what improvements can we make there. So we've been dreaming about this for the past 2 years, but never had a real opportunity, time, and resources to do it. But then with this crisis that actually pushed us into digital transformation, which showed us that we definitely must adapt and must use some new things. We actually seized the moment and decided to do this right now. And we wouldn't be able to do it without generous support of our donors, USAID, Balkan Trust for Democracy, and European Endowment for Democracy. And we thank them for their support for this research and for many other projects that we have been doing together. And we also owe a huge thanks to all partners throughout the region that helped us with the distribution of our survey, including TechSoup Balkans, Balkan Civil Society Development Network, civic initiatives from Serbia, Solidarna from Croatia, Mreža za izgradnju mira and Center for Civil Society Promotion from Bosnia, Horus, MCIC, FACT, Center for NGO Development, and Partners Albania. So we thank all these organizations from Bosnia, Croatia, Montenegro, Macedonia, and Serbia for their partnership and for their contribution to this research. We really wouldn't be able to do it without you. The whole research will be presented by our founder and director, Nathan Koshel, a guy who came with a vision 7 years ago and founded Catalyst with the mission to develop philanthropy ecosystems throughout Western Balkans using data and technology. And without any further ado, I give the floor to Nathan, who will present the whole research and our major conclusions. Nathan, please.
Thank you, Milos. Let me just get the share screen set up here. And all right, great. So thank you very much, Milos, and thank you to everyone who's attending today. We are recording the webinar, and we'll make it available for those that were not able to attend. Perhaps before we continue, I want to give a shout out to our fantastic research team led by Catalyst's co-founder, Alexandra Vesic, and supported by a researcher who has recently left Catalyst named Thomas Bueno dos Santos Momcilovic. The two of them worked really hard on both setting up the methodology and the survey tool, and then doing the analysis of the answers. We realized, as we often do, after the survey tool is complete and after we have sent it out to everyone and it's been filled in and we're in the process of analyzing, we realized we asked too many questions and we gave too many options for answers. So it was quite the effort to be for them to be digging deeper into all of the information that is there. And it's actually for that reason that apart from holding a regional webinar, we realized it is important for us to also hold country-level webinars that will allow us to dig a little more deeply. And so the first country webinar starts tomorrow and continues through to next week. The entire goal of this, as Milos already spoke about, was to really get an understanding of how are nonprofits currently using technology, and what security practices are they using, what are their current sets of knowledge and skills about the use of technology, and then what are the most pressing needs they have in terms of new skills, software, hardware, and during this period of COVID, how have they adapted? Because that's also a very interesting question. Have there been adaptations that have been made? And you will discover that some of the conventional wisdom that you might have, that yes, indeed, nonprofits have adapted, holds true, but then it may not hold true to the extent that we all thought it would. So the idea here is both for organizations who are interested in the topic for their own purposes, this can serve as a baseline to understand how does my organization compare to the results of the survey. But for organizations that are involved in grant making or involved in capacity building of the nonprofit sector, we hope that the results of this survey can serve as a baseline from which new programmatic planning can be done for future grant making and future capacity building. The survey was done in a random way and through an online sample. As Milos already said, we worked with 11 organizations across 6 countries. We actually also made a valiant effort to gather to work with partners in Kosovo and to also get responses from Kosovo, but at the end we received only 5 responses, which was not enough for us to include it as a representative sample for the purposes of this. So I'm sorry for that, but after extending the survey period for an additional 2 weeks, we still were not able to do that. So this is the way it works sometimes. In total, you will see that we had 404 total respondents. So you can see the distribution of the responses across the countries. We had targets set for each of the countries in terms of the number of responses we wanted to attain, and we successfully achieved those minimum sample levels and exceeded them in several countries. Some of the next slides will be a little bit busy because what we're trying to do is show you both the overall information as well as the by-country information on the demographics of the nonprofits that have registered in the survey. So you can see by overall that about 40% are formed within the last 10 years, another 40% between 10 and 20 years ago, and then about 22% were formed more than 20 years ago. So it's quite a disaggregation in terms of the number of years that an organization has been in existence. If you look at the breakdown by country, you will see some of what might be expected when you look at the more than 20 years ago, that Croatia has a larger number of organizations that were formed more than 20 years ago. Montenegro has the least number of organizations formed more than 20 years ago. And yet, when you look all the way over at the less than 10 years ago, that situation is reversed, with Montenegro 67% of the respondents being formed less than 10 years ago. So when we look at the type of legal registration in all of the countries that we surveyed, we have a framework of foundation versus association, and 92% of the respondents come from associations and 8% come from foundations. And then you can see the breakdown by country, where in Albania, 19% of the respondents came from foundations, and in Serbia, only 5.5% of the respondents came from foundations. In terms of the number of people engaged in organizations, our goal was to try to understand the number of people involved in an organization, that may be counting both people that are employed and people that are volunteers or otherwise engaged. In responses to the questions, we suspect that there may have been some inconsistencies in translation, because there were some differences in the way that the question was answered by country. And so we suspect that perhaps there may have been a little bit of a problem with the translation. Nonetheless, the vast majority of organizations have either between 1 to 5 or 6 to 20 people involved. And this is very indicative of the size of organization that we know of, that may be professional, maybe voluntary, may have a combination of both, but they're sitting in that mid-range of size. So we also wanted to understand what the overall budget was, and overall we found that less than that almost 60% of respondents had a budget of less than 100,000 euros, About a little bit less than 20% had a budget between 100 and 300,000, and just less than 20% had more than 300,000 euros of annual budget. 4% of respondents didn't answer the question. When you look at it from a country level, you see that Croatia had only 30% of respondents that had less than 100,000 euros in annual revenue, and it was Montenegro where more than 70% of the organizations had less than 100,000. But it's important to note that very similar responses in Bosnia, Montenegro, North Macedonia, and Serbia. When we look at between 100 and 300,000, we see that both Albania and Croatia are quite close in the number of respondents, 23, 24, 26%. And then when we look down at the larger sized organizations, again, it's Albania and Croatia where we saw a greater number of respondents that come from bigger sized organizations in terms of revenue. We asked a question, we asked several questions actually. What was the percentage of annual budget expended on IT hardware? And then what was the percentage of annual budget expended on IT software, products, and services lumped together? The answer to this question actually surprised us to some extent. But what we found was that in 25% of the cases, hardware expenditure is less than 1% of the budget. And in 30% of the cases, software products and services are less than 30% of the budget. We saw 23, 24% being spent in both categories, with 23 and 24% of respondents saying they spent between 1 and 3% in both categories. And as we go up, we even had around 6% of each category of respondents saying that they spent more than 10%, which was actually a surprising number because it seems like an awful large sum of money to spend on these needs. When we wrong way, there we go. When we break it down just by expenditures in IT hardware, we did have quite a number of respondents, between 20 and 40% who did not know the answer to the question. But when we break it down, we see that in Albania we had a much higher response rate from those who have spent more than 10% on hardware. And we have in Serbia about 33% saying that they spent less than 1% on hardware. So the responses are a little bit all over the board, and I think we will be digging a little bit more deeply into this as we look at the country levels and the country webinars moving forward. Again, looking at software products and services, again, just to review, we have Albania kind of being at the top of the class in terms of the annual expenditure of over 10% of the annual revenue on software products and services. We have the majority of countries then spending in that between below 1% and then 1 to 3% range. Software categories most used by nonprofits. We presented about 20 different software categories. We also tried to make explanations in our questionnaire about what those categories actually meant. What we found is that there were high levels of usage by most nonprofits across all countries in 5 key software categories. So that's internal communication, that's external communication, that's social network management, that is presentation software, so and then text processing, so Microsoft Word and other suites like that. We had a range of between 85% and 100% usage in these 5 categories across all 6 countries. But when we looked at the software categories least used by nonprofits, this was a little bit more insightful. We were surprised to see that only between 57 and 76% of nonprofits report that they use an internet security product in an environment where We talk all of the time about the closing space for civil society, where we're under data security laws in most of our countries, where we have an obligation as registered entities in our country to ensure the security of the data that we transfer. When we're doing case management or tracking human rights issues or working with vulnerable clients, it's important that internet security is invested in, and that seems to be an area that's one of the least used by nonprofits. Understanding what the conversation is in your community, what the conversation is in media, how your organization is viewed by the public. Those are all aspects of using media clipping software and media clipping products that are only used between 45 and 71% of the time by nonprofits. So again, another software category that could be used more often and more effectively. Voice over IP, so that is using Skype or using any other IP system or internet system to actually make phone calls for a much cheaper price than using landlines or mobile phones. Again, we found adoption in Montenegro at 33%, with the highest registered in Albania at 62%. Advanced analytics and statistics using software packages like a number of software packages like SDSS or Tableau or other packages of software that use analytics and statistics. While we saw a high adoption, high usage in Albania of 72% from respondents, the remainder of the countries range between 25% in Montenegro and maxing out at 49% with North Macedonia. And then finally, intra-team productivity analytics. These are analytics that take a look at how our team's productive, that do measurement of time, measurement of accomplishments of tasks. Some examples of these types of software packages include Asana. Salesforce can do that to some extent, and there are a number of other programs that are integrated into Google Suite or integrated into Microsoft Office 365 suites that can do that for you as well. But this was the least used software category, ranging between 29% and 43% of organizations who use it. Oh, this is a complicated slide, so bear with me. The slides will be sent out to you as well if they haven't already been done so in the chat. What we wanted to understand is how were software categories used, whether they were used at all, whether they were used before COVID, and then what was the adoption rate after COVID of software that hadn't previously been used. And so we found 4 key categories of software where there was a greater uptake of the use of software afterwards. And so if you'll see the gray, you'll see that conference calls, webinar software, something like Whereby or Zoom or any of the other ones that we've all come to know and learn, were actually in use by 42 to 58% of organizations before COVID. But after COVID, we also saw huge increases where between 30% and 47% of organizations responded they started to use, leaving only between 9 and 19% of organizations who were surveyed who don't actually take advantage or use this software at all. It actually is quite surprising for that percentage to even be so high, considering how so many of us have had to pivot ourselves to online communication. Similarly, the voice over IP software category, we saw there was decent adoption prior to COVID, but some increases between 6 and 15%, 14% after COVID. But it still remains significant numbers of nonprofits who do not use voice over IP, which, as you saw in the previous slide, makes it one of the software categories that are still least used by the nonprofit sector. Looking at presentations, high majority of organizations were using the software, these types of software like PowerPoint or other softwares like this. But we did see an increase in some countries that started to make use of it. And similarly, accounting software, when things had to turn digital, it suddenly became more important for some organizations to pivot to the use of that. Looking at the top 5 categories, according to the way software solutions were found, because one of our questions was, are you using a free solution? Are you using a paid solution? Are you using a donated solution? Do you use a pirated copy? What about outsourcing? Are you outsourcing some of your activities to another organization or entity to handle it for you? And then where is it that there are no solutions? And we wanted to find out which categories were the most frequent under each of those. So we found out in general that approximately 2/3 of organizations use free solutions, and approximately 1/3 pay for the solutions. What was very surprising to us was that less than 10% of organizations reported using donated solutions, even though there is an abundance of opportunities for organizations to take advantage of donated solutions, including having a very strong presence of TechSoup in the region, where donated solutions are able to be gotten of quite a number of really key software suites. There's also less than 10% of organizations used pirated copies or used outsourcing services. We noted that 1/3 of organizations have no solutions, and about 1/5 of respondents had no need for solutions. So you can see here the different types of categories of software in which solutions were most used. Top 5 categories according to the way solution softwares were found. And this just shows you the breakdown by country. We see that donated solutions are most often used in Croatia, Montenegro, and Serbia. And there seems to be less of a saturation in Albania, Bosnia, and North Macedonia. You can see that paid solutions seem to be more prevalent in Albania and in Croatia, with 30 and 19% respectively. And looking at the areas where software solutions were not found, we found 5 categories where it was more difficult for organizations to actually find the software solution that they were looking for. These actually, 3 or 4 of them actually correspond to those categories that are the ones least used by organizations. And so what we can understand from these 2 answers put together is that while there may be a need for solutions in certain software categories, nonprofits may not be aware of what the best solution is or have not yet found the best solution for themselves. In looking at organizations who paid for their software as opposed to received it as a donation, there were 5 categories of software where we saw a real dissonance between the number of organizations who have paid for the software versus those who have received it as a donation. And this comes in a scenario where there are ample opportunities in all 5 of these categories to actually get donated software. So in the accounting, we saw organizations by 5 times more organizations, even 10 times more organizations using paid solutions rather than donated solutions. Again, in the internet security, where you have free solutions like Bitdefender or Norton that are available through TechSoup, again, you have a very few number of organizations that are using those solutions on a donated basis. Conference calls, webinars, again, we have many paid solutions, even though free solutions are out there. The Whereby software that we're using today, well, the one that we're currently using right now is a paid solution. You can use a free solution, and you can even write to them and get a donated get a donation that upgrades you to the pro level, and gives you more functionality. Our higher end enterprise version is paid, but the pro version that you can get as a donation is available just for the asking. So, design, again, we saw actually quite a number of organizations in Croatia and Montenegro, more than in other categories, use donated solutions, but we still saw a lot of paid solutions being used. And then again, external communication, mailings, newsletters. While there are many solutions out there to address the mailings and newsletters, the vast majority of the organizations spent money on it rather than got it as a donation. Top software categories that nonprofits had an intention or have started to realize that they would like to use more intensively. We see that there are many organizations who responded that they would like to use conference calls and webinars more intensively. Project management software is starting to be something that organizations are quite interested in, ranging from 33% up to 58%. Databases, social network management, and media clipping were all in areas of interest. So even though social network management, we saw very high levels of usage, it was one of the top categories, and also conference calls and webinars were one of the top already used categories. We saw many organizations looking forward to the future as those being two areas where they would like to use it more intensively. Given the scenario where we have some of these same areas as being ones where paid solutions are being sought, one of the possibilities to aid organizations in using these types of software more intensively may lie in the helping organizations to understand where donated or free solutions actually exist, and helping them to transition to the use of that software. Another 5 categories that fall into that framework of where organizations want to use it more intensively. Design, ranging from 26% up to 54%. Data storage, that's quite an important aspect as we begin to look at organizations taking more responsibility for their data, and understanding that keeping data in a digital format comes with a different set of costs and requirements and responsibilities than keeping data in paper form. Data collection tools, donation and grant management software, and internet security are all areas where organizations see that they would like to begin to use these types of software more. At the outset of COVID, the question was posed, how difficult was it for your organization to switch into a different mode of operation? And while you'll see that many organizations reported in some countries that it was generally easy, with Croatia, Bosnia, Serbian organizations, Montenegrin organizations, almost those 4, almost the majority said that it was generally easy. In countries like North Macedonia and Albania, it seemed not as easy, and fit more into the category of neither easy nor difficult. And even in Albania, 42%, most of the respondents answered that it was generally difficult. What we found is that the #1 reported problem in the countries where it seemed more difficult was that the primary activities with beneficiaries actually had come to a halt. So it wasn't about technology necessarily, but instead it was about what was going on the ground. In terms of the difficulties faced by organizations in Bosnia, North Macedonia, and Serbia, there was also this issue that staff did not have enough digital knowledge to be able to adapt. And then some organizations in some countries actually experienced difficulties through having a lack of resources and equipment. Some may have had desktop computers that were sitting in offices, and now it was difficult for them to move them to the homes of their staff members, and other difficulties that were faced. There were those who found it more easy. Some of the reasons they found it easy was that their organizations had already gotten themselves adapted to remote work before the pandemic. In some cases, they don't even have an office at all, so they were already working from home. Some reported that they had responsible, flexible, and communicative teams who had already used the existing software and just took more advantage of the software they already had. And then some reported that they were able to change their activities or modify the activities in the way that they performed them. Looking at what are the biggest barriers to the organization for better and more efficient use of technology solutions, we posed kind of three answers. Was it the issue of resources to buy hardware, the issue of resources to buy software, or the lack of knowledge and skills? And as can be expected, it's about resources, and it's about budgets, and it's about not having the money to buy the hardware and the software that you would want. Obviously, there's a partial solution in organizations taking a greater advantage of donated services or in-kind services, and so that's something that could be explored. In terms of the lack of knowledge and skills, while that seemed to be a factor, it didn't rank as much of a factor in most countries, with respondents between 14 and 25% saying that was an issue. What was a little more surprising for us was the number of organizations who are using personally owned computers, computers owned by the employees or volunteers and not by the organization. And so we see that is still really an issue in the majority of respondents. Croatia, 51% of organizations responded that it was an issue. With organizations in Montenegro, 79% of those who responded are saying they're using their personally owned computers. So again, it's an issue about resources. Switching to the types of hardware most needed by nonprofits, we saw that laptop PCs are universally the preferred and the greatest need expressed by organizations across all of the countries, followed by offline data storage space. So not data storage in the cloud, but actually hard physical data storage. Desktop PCs to a lesser extent, and cameras. There were also questions about servers, projectors, smartphones, and tablets. But less than 50% of respondents in all countries mentioned those. And there were very few who mentioned the need for printers or sound processing equipment. We wanted to understand, how did nonprofits learn about how to use the technological solutions, and then also, if they did get external assistance, where did they actually get that assistance from? So while most of the respondents said that they were self-taught, with 68% or 67% of Albanian organizations stating that, and all the way up to 92% of Montenegrin organizations stating that. The rest said that they sought external assistance. And when we looked at, well, how does that break down? We specifically wanted to understand what role does the TechSoup Balkans and the national resource centers in each country, national civil society resource centers in each country play, as well as what role do other local service providers play. And so we see the breakdown that really country by country, the role was bigger or smaller, with TechSoup being a source for 35% of those who in Croatia who sought external assistance, and with the National Resource Center in Albania actually being the primary resource for those in Albania who sought external assistance. We wanted to understand, and we dug a little bit deeper into the satisfaction of the nonprofits surveyed on the level of internet security and in terms of the work of the organization and employees. And we actually saw that there was quite a difference from country to country. In Bosnia and Croatia, we see higher levels of organizations expressing satisfaction with their internet security. And then in Serbia, we also saw that more organizations expressed satisfaction than dissatisfaction. Whereas we saw Albania, Montenegro, and North Macedonia having a greater percentage of organizations who felt generally unsatisfied versus generally satisfied. We wanted to understand specifically in the security area what areas are nonprofits not currently using tech solutions for. And so the top 5 areas that we've surveyed include the protection and encryption of communication, something that's quite easily solved with WhatsApp, Telegram, and other forms of encrypted communications that can be utilized. Protection and encryption of data. Again, software solutions are out there and exist and some are even free to use that have been developed by the global civil society for organizations who are seeking these types of solutions. But between 13 and 33% of organizations stated that they don't use a solution to protect or encrypt their data. Hack prevention, which has many different technological solutions that are out there. That may be an area that requires some greater technical knowledge as well. But again, it's an area where about 15 to 25% of organizations said that they don't use solutions. Virtual private networks, between 6 and 17% of organizations have said that they don't use this. And again, looking at fraud detection, again, it's an area where very few organizations have demonstrated that they're using this particular area. So this is some key areas of security where nonprofits could really benefit in getting a greater amount of education, understanding what products are out there for them to use, and then having the resources to be able to implement them. When we ask what would be needed to improve the security of your organization's work on the internet, we have interesting answers, because now here we have both better software and better employee and volunteer knowledge kind of topping the charts, whereas the issue about better hardware, while it's also a key issue and the majority of respondents also identified this as a category, it seems that better software and better employee and volunteer knowledge were the greater areas, with some variances between countries. All right. So now we've come to a moment where I can stop talking and we can start having some questions and answers and perhaps even digging deeper into some of the data if that's interesting to some of you. So.
People are still kind of shy, and there are still no questions in the chat box. But while our attendees are thinking and coming up with new questions for you, I may have a couple of them actually. So we could see in the presentation that nonprofits believe that the lack of knowledge and skills is not that big barrier for more efficient technology use. But on the other hand, the most interesting part, for me at least, was when you were speaking about how they got software. Are they using donations, or they paid for their software, or using pirated versions? So obviously there is a gap between the knowledge and perception of the whole market. So how do we bridge that gap? What needs to happen so that nonprofits would use available solutions more throughout the Western Balkan market?
Well, I think there's a couple of issues. One is the existing resources that are out there, TechSoup Balkans, and to a lesser extent the CSO resource centers on a national level. They can figure out a way of how to get a greater reach to organizations. we're operating on the belief that our methodology actually got a decent representation of the organizations in each country, and with that belief, it seems that there's simply not enough organizations who are aware of these services. But secondarily, it can be about offering the training in the use of it. My own experience in Catalyst is that there's lots of people who say they know how to use software, but their definition of knowing how to use software can be quite varied. And so if grant-making organizations or organizations whose purpose is to provide capacity building begin to look at how do we actually really build capacity towards improved use rather than just getting the software or the solution to the organization, but actually walking them through the good use of it. That's one. I think a second one lies in looking locally. Catalyst is, of course, involved significantly in understanding giving and understanding domestic philanthropy throughout the region. And we see time and time again many companies, whether they be IT companies or other companies, who are willing to make donations of hardware. Sometimes those are older computers. Sometimes you have to make investments in upgrading them, but they're cheaper than buying new. And some entities have software solutions that they provide to the domestic market, the commercial market, that can be adapted and be put into use through a donation, just like global IT companies. And so looking at those types of solutions is also a way.
Cool, thanks. You were speaking actually mostly about software categories, but do you perhaps have data on exact software nonprofits throughout the region prefer to use? For example, are they using more Microsoft 365 or the whole Google suite for nonprofits? And what are other apps and what's other software that nonprofits generally use throughout the region? Are there any big differences between the countries?
There are some differences. I mean, when we compare, I mean, Microsoft 365 is an adopted. It seems to be a predominant software suite that's used. Depending on the current country, it's between 53 and 74% of organizations use it. We see that Google is used also by many organizations, maybe not for all. For instance, Google Mail seems to be used quite a bit more than Google Docs or other elements of it. MailChimp seems to be a prevalent usage in many countries. So, I mean, we see some commonalities in terms of certain software that are already popular out there. Zoom now, of course, is picked up by many organizations as kind of the go-to conference and video conferencing software to use, even though there are a lot of options that are out there and that exist. And there are some differences between countries, but it's not anything huge to note. So.
Cool, thanks. Do we perhaps have any questions from our attendees on the results of the research, on possibilities they can use perhaps in their countries? If you, for example, weren't aware of, I don't know, TechSoup's existence or other organizations that provide similar support, we will be happy to connect you with them and to share our experiences actually on various tools. Maybe actually we can ask something our attendees, and actually the last question I had for Nathan, I want to hear from actually you guys. What do you use in your own organization? Do you prefer Microsoft or Google products? What do you use for email and for word processing? Microsoft or Google? And you can actually type your answers in the chat box. We didn't I mean, that's the only way we can have some kind of interaction here until we one day get back to normal and have normal meetings. So, what do you guys use, Microsoft or Google in your own organizations? You can type in, Alexander is using Google, okay. You can type in your answers in the chat box. You have down there, you have a couple of options, and when you click chat, you will open a chat box and you can leave your answers there. Um, Nathan, are there any other important messages you wanted to share with the attendees today?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think to conclude, there's been a lot of effort and attention that has been put on the digital transformation of the nonprofit sector. Um, it seems that many organizations have, to one extent or another, begun to adopt um, uh, digital solutions within their work frame. Uh, but it also seems that it is not as fully adopted in a lot of the areas all the way through the organization as it could be. Some of the weaknesses of some of the organizations in being able to respond to COVID-19 seem to center around the lack of a digital thinking and mindset in the organization. And yet we know that while some arguments from organizations who operate in an old school way, oh, we don't want to change, we don't want to do things the new way. We know from organizations who have adopted and used digital solutions that they can do it. It's cost effective. It's not actually that difficult to train staff and for staff to learn. It creates safer data practices. Where data now is secure in a digital format rather than in paper. It makes it easier for people who are spread apart and away from each other in an office and distributed. It's easier to share data and information. And it's easier to collaborate both with people within an organization and across organizations. And so there's a lot of arguments to be made for why continued push for the adoption and use of digital solutions should really be made. We have really great resources in the CSO National Resource Centers and in the TechSoup Balkans and other organizations like what Catalyst does with some of its products. We really have a great ability to help other organizations learn. But it seems that there also is an issue of the demand side. The supply side is there. There are resources available. It seems that many organizations still have not fully embraced or understood what the possibilities are that are out there. In terms of a message or a communication to grant makers and grant making organizations or those that are providing capacity building, we believe that integrating a digital transformation approach that allows organizations to be able to keep track of their monitoring and evaluation and their indicators in a data safe and responsible way. Thank you, Azra, for coming. But it seems that by working with organizations through the capacity building programs or through their grants, encouraging grantees to actually use data in a responsible way and to begin to further their digital transformation can help to make not only more efficient organizations, but more resilient organizations. So we don't know how long COVID is going to last. We don't know if there's going to be further rounds of this. What we do know is that there will be future natural disasters. There will be future disruptions to our livelihoods because of climate change, because of economic, God forbid, because of war. And by transforming ourselves to a digital framework we become more capable and more able to help the people that we are here to serve. And so I think it's an important issue that we begin to pay more and more attention to, and really look at ourselves. How do we actually use technology more and embrace it, and use it to our advantage rather than shy away from it or feel afraid from it? It's a responsibility of grant makers then to make sure that the resources are available for organizations to be able to do that.
Cool, thanks. And actually, another important point, and you made that in the very beginning of your presentation when you were speaking about annual budget expenditures on IT costs. Do you perhaps know what's the average percentage, either at global or US or European level, and how do we compare with that? I mean, if I remember, around 30% is less than around 30% of respondents responded with less than 1% of their annual budget.
I don't know the answer to your question. I wish I did, and I'm sorry to not. But do you know the answer to the question?
No, but I would like to find that out because
I know we can find that out. There are. I mean, as a matter of fact, the inspiration you were talking about us thinking about doing this 2 years ago. Well, the inspiration for us doing this was because we do see on the global level, there's like Tech for Nonprofits and other global frameworks that exist where they survey organizations, and they'll do global surveys every year or every 2 years. So those metrics are out there. What I do know is that in looking during the COVID period of time, when we were looking at other surveys that are being done, some that are like done on a local or state level in the U.S., not national, others that were done nationally in other places, we saw that encountering difficulties with technology and the lack of resources, regardless of what percentage they're already spending, those are two barriers that many nonprofits globally were encountering. So it remains an issue. I think it becomes this. It's never enough, and now it goes also to how do we wisely spend our limited funds, and how do we make sure that we don't go out and buy the Mercedes of computers when we have the money in the budget, those types of things. But that goes down to responsible budgeting anyways, which I'm sure most organizations are actually involved in. So.
Cool. Thank you for this conversation. I mean, we can continue back in the office, or on our weekly meetings.
But the silent majority out there haven't said anything yet. So
yeah. So guys, this is probably a last chance. If you have any questions, last chance this webinar. We will have multiple webinars in the coming days, and we invite you to join them as well. You can still sign up. Tomorrow we will have a webinar on nonprofit tech in Serbia. On Thursday we will speak about nonprofit tech in Bosnia and Montenegro. On Friday, Albania and North Macedonia are on the agenda, and next Tuesday we're speaking about Croatia, and we will finish with the webinars. But of course, we stay at your disposal for any questions and further discussions.
And all the country, just to note, all of the country webinars are being held in the primary language of the country, so you won't have to hear me anymore.
Yeah. So if there are no any more questions, Nathan, should we close this webinar? We're exactly 1 hour, so we're.
You can. I just want to say thank you once again to Balkan Trust for Democracy, who with USAID funding provided us with an emergency grant or a rapid COVID response grant to be able to implement this survey. And then we sought some co-funding from the European Endowment for Democracy. And again, we're grateful for both grant makers for responding so quickly and allowing us to react and provide this. I also thank you to the 11 organizations throughout the region who stepped up and promoted the survey to through their newsletters and through their Facebook pages and to the organizations that they work with. We were very pleased that we were able to get 400 person or 400 organization response, especially since our target was about 300. So we exceeded our targets, and that was excellent. So thank you to all who participated. Thank you to the team, to Alexandra Vesic and Thomas for the fantastic work they did and the hard work that they did in doing the investigating and analysis of the results. And thank you to all of you who, even though you're silent today, decided to come and listen and to understand a little bit more. Be looking for our infographics on the topic. They're starting to be published today and will be published over the next few days. And we look forward to having you join our country level presentations over the next few days. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you all. And if you have any questions, just message us, office@catholicsbalkans.org, or you can use Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We don't have TikTok, but we do have SlideShare, and we shared actually the links to this presentation there. And we will follow up with you tomorrow with all of these resources. Thank you once again. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.